Okay, good morning everybody, and thank you very much for coming along on this this breakfast event. This is the third in our series of teaching and learning breakfasts, and the catering must be good because more and more people keep coming to each event. So thanks very much for coming along. I'd like to say a special welcome to our colleagues from Adelaide and Flinders. There are many online and some in the room, and also we have some people from TAFE SA who hopefully you're listening to me talking right now, or you might be in the room. And if so, welcome. It's great to see colleagues from other institutions. We're very lucky today to have Dr. Abelardo Pardo from the University of Sydney. He's from the Department of Engineering and has a huge amount of experience in online learning, analytics, personalised software for teaching and things like that. And he's here to speak to us about flipped classroom and some design considerations when implementing flipped classroom. So over to you, Abelardo. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming here in this beautiful morning here in Adelaide. As you probably have seen from the email we'd sent you before, it would be a bit of a contradiction if we come here to a flipped seminar and we do the usual thing of me telling you what to do and you just passively listening. So this is one of the tricky seminars that you have to go through, which is you have to work, all right? So the overall idea is for you to do a design exercise, a quick design exercise. We used to run this workshop in a 2-hour slot, so we compressed it a bit, and we might be going at sometimes a little bit fast, but that's okay. The idea is for you to get you thinking and exposed to this exercise of designing a little unit, call it unit just in general, that you would maybe deploy in a class. So, see if I manage to go through. What is the plan? My arrow is here. So what is the plan? We basically want to structure the whole session in three blocks. The first one, we're going to talk, I think, very briefly about what is flipped classroom. How many of you have had some sort of exposure to flipped classroom? Pretty much all of you. Most of you, half. Let's just say half, okay? By the way, that's another thing that I will be doing all the time, asking you for your participation, because that's one of the ingredients of the flipped classroom. So I'll be asking you to raise your hand, things of that sort, so make sure you participate. So that'll be brief description of what it is, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Then the tricky part, how do you go about to deploy one of these things? And we'll give basically some initial ideas for you to think about it, because as you probably are aware, each context is different. I want you to think about your learning experience, your learning situation, your students. What is it that they have to achieve at the end of the session? Each one of you will be thinking about a different example. And still, the trick here is that we're going to share a lot of information among ourselves here, and hopefully also through the chat window or the audio with the virtual people, with the people in the virtual classroom. Okay? So the idea is to expose you to as many scenarios as possible to get you to think about different ways of deploying the flipped classroom. And this typically works very well in this type of seminars because we have a very varied crowd. A lot of people doing different things. So maybe the objective you're not entirely familiar with, but the technique is like, oh, that's a great idea. I can do that in my class or in my situation. And finally, the objective is for you to walk out of here with a plan. Not a very detailed plan, because we're not going to spend a long time doing that, but at least sketching the plan. Say, okay, yeah, I know more or less 2 or 3 steps I should follow, and I have in my head the basic ingredients that I should be exploring in order to see if I can deploy a flipped classroom. Okay? Great. So let's start first very quickly. What is it? And maybe some of you are already thinking, well, this flipped classroom thing is basically a buzzword, and it is. To be honest, it's just that, one day somebody said, oh, we're doing this other thing, we're going to call it differently, and we all go crazy about it. And in this type of seminars, I always get somebody in the audience and say, well, what is the big deal about it? It's nothing new, and it is not. It is something that we've been trying to do for a long time, which is get our students to do something before we meet face-to-face. The problem is that those of you that try to do that, the level of success is kind of like frustrating. So this is basically, you should take it, the flipped classroom, as another go, another take. Let's see if we can tackle that problem again. And Why do we have all this focus all the time? Well, because we might have some new resources, techniques, ideas, whatever you want to call it. So it's just revisiting something that we've been trying to do for a long, long time, which is get people engaged. Now, in these seminars, I'm not aware of your level of pain. I can tell you my pain. My pain, I teach a first year unit, which I consider contact sport, okay? You go there. It's 450 people, large theater, and I faced this problem of trying to talk to them. That was like 5-6 years ago, looking at their faces and telling to myself, this is not working. This is not working. And it's so obvious, right? And I think more or less, a lot of people are becoming more and more aware of this realization. So we all get together in a theater. Here's my PowerPoint. I'm going to tell you these beautiful ideas. Then you look at your kids and it's like, simple transfer of information does not work. And again, this is not something new. It's just that maybe the level of pain now is increasing because the students now can go online. They can find so many resources. There's so much stuff out there that then not paying attention is much more obvious or painful or whatever you want to call it. If you are delivering your beloved PowerPoint, which you curated for a period of 10 years, maybe your kids are immediately going to the net and find this other presentation from Stanford or Harvard or who knows where, and they're looking at those figures like, look, this is much better, this is clearer, I understand this better, and maybe they're doing that while you're trying to explain to them something. And that's okay, and there is not much you can do about it. I mean, you can say, please do not use your computers while I'm teaching, or do not use your mobile phones, but you know that it's a lost battle. It's a lost battle. So better do something about it. The other big realization, and this is also something happening here, we don't think too much about it, but face-to-face time is incredibly valuable. Like all of you giving 1.5 hours this morning here, that's incredibly valuable. So if you think of it, we have to make the most out of it. You have to walk out of here with as much as possible on your way to maybe considering deploying a flipped classroom. And that's why we have to be much more strategic. And that's why I gave you this email before here, say, look at these resources, look at them. Why? Because if I cover that, I'll be wasting 3/4 of these 1.5 hours, really precious 1.5 hours. And it's the same thing for the students. They come and meet you for 2 hours. I teach 2-hour lecture. Those 2 hours, we have to make the most out of it. And that's what gets you thinking, how do I make the most out of it? And immediately what you think is like, wouldn't it be great if they do something before they come here? That's the beginning. Yeah, it would be great. And the name of the game is, all right, so let's assume we are successful and we can manage to get our students to do something before they come to the class. Then I have another problem. What do we do in the class? So as you can see in this seminar, for example, it's much simpler for me to get a PowerPoint out and start talking for 1.5 hours. I can do that perfectly, no problem. But it wouldn't be effective for you. It wouldn't be useful. It is much more useful if you get into this design exercise, if you get to write, if you get to talk to the people next to you, and then we put it all in common. Then we will all get exposure to lots of ideas. That's much more effective. So that's the name of the game, so to speak. Okay? So these two realizations are combined with a little bit of a different strategy, which is, I don't know about your experience, but in my experience, I think teaching is getting more complex. Why? Because we have such a wide variety of tools, techniques, resources, tricks, that is like, whoa, what do I do now? Now it's the flipped classroom. Tomorrow is the blended learning. What's next, right? So we need to be a bit more strategic and say, all right, if I have a much more larger set of tools, I need to be a bit more aware of what kind of tool is the right one for the situation. Whereas before, you go to your lecture, you give your lecture, and that's pretty much it. So we have to kind of handle this additional complexity. So, very quickly, this is the reasoning behind this strategy. What we used to do in the classes was, all right, this is the Bloom's taxonomy from simplest to more complex, all the way at the top. So remembering basic facts, that's the lowest level of cognitive load. Understanding certain concepts, that requires a little bit more effort. Then we go to applying certain concepts, and I want you to start thinking about your scenario, your class, your unit of a study. Think of your students walking this ladder. First, remembering basic facts, then understanding, then applying them. Then we go to analyzing situations, case studies, then evaluating real situations out there, and finally, the highest level is creating something new. And you probably agree with me that that's a fairly generic scale, and it makes sense in pretty much all educational situations. We start with the easy ones and then we go up. Typically, the way we tackle this is, all right, in the lecture, I'm going to make sure you remember things, and maybe I'll manage to get you to understand some basic concepts. So we typically focus on the class in the basic stuff. And I talk to you and I give you my PowerPoints and the figures accompany that. And after we met for 2 hours and we did that, then I'll give you some homework. And the homework is really, or exercises, whatever you want to call it, that's when you, maybe not explicitly, but implicitly, you're asking your students to apply the concepts they just heard about, analyze certain situations, depends on the level of your course, okay? So this is typically what we used to do, but I'm not going to say that it doesn't work. That's another question that I get all the time in these seminars. What is wrong with me? They are telling them with my PowerPoint. Nothing. There's nothing wrong. Just approach it from a different angle, which is instead of one tool, you have two. And maybe you have situations in which you use one and the other in another situation. So just take it like that. So if this is the case, if this is our approach, if we try to walk that ladder of complexity, can we do better? Is there a different way? And this is pretty much the whole strategy. If you consider that successful lecture as something that I cover all the material in the allotted time, you define that as a successful lecture, then, well, you will have certain requirements, and if you comply with them, that's it. That's a good lecture. There's no discussion about it. However, if you change a little bit the notion of a successful session, then is when you start thinking about what is the new strategy. This seminar, it won't be successful if I cover all the slides in the allotted time. It will be successful only if you walk out of here with a much clearer idea on how to deploy a flipped classroom. So, and this is something that creates a lot of friction. Why? Because my success now relies on you. And that's the awkward part. That's when people say, yeah, but you know, I'm much more comfortable talking about my thing because I know, because your definition of success is a much more comfortable one. And I give it to you. Yeah, this is difficult. And some people say, no, I'm not going to play that game, and that's okay. But you have to be aware of this. So, and this is actually something that I've been collecting tricks also over the years, and I tell my students, I convey to them my uncomfortable feeling, you know, like, you know what, you're not going to believe it, but now I'm walking here in front of all 450 of you, and guess what, this is going to work only if you work. And I'm not happy about it, and I just want you to be aware of that. You know, I use that as leverage. Whatever it works, as long as it is legal. So, how do you revisit this? So here's a different strategy. Let's see if I convince my students to work previously before they come and meet face-to-face. And the type of tasks or the type of concepts are going to be the simple ones. Remembering basic facts, understanding basic facts, and maybe applying some basic things. There is not a clear-cut division here, okay? This is not a step-by-step recipe. I need your expertise. I need your know-how to start shaping this to your learning scenario. But this is basically the trick. And that will connect maybe with some things that you already heard about Flipped Classroom, which is, oh yeah, Flipped Classroom is using videos. Well, yes and no. It's a very raw simplification, but the videos fit nicely on remembering and understanding. That's why. So it's not necessarily that in order to do a Flipped Classroom, you have to use videos. It's just that once you think about, let me make sure that my students do this preparation before they come to class, you have to start with the basic stuff. And with the basic stuff, sometimes you convey it very nicely with videos. I remember in one of the seminars, one person said, you know, I'm very worried because my institution is recording my lectures and students keep not coming to my lectures because they are recorded. And it's like, okay, but if you think of it, if what you're covering in your lecture is basic things and they are passive, it's a much more convenient way of looking at that. So it's not a matter of, look at my students, how can they do that? It's actually, I would do the same, right? It's a matter of, all right, if you're doing that, let's see what else can I offer you that is crucial to be face-to-face. That's a different angle. So you would try to first cover those basic levels before they come to class. And then, and this is the big shift, in class, a very different thing happens. So it's not anymore you comfortably sitting behind the podium and saying, slide number 15, look at this figure, look at this issue, look at this thing. It's more like, go, do something. Now, some of you might be thinking, yeah, okay, that works when the audience is small, like in here, right? Not only that, I mean, the furniture is helping. You are sitting, looking at each other, which is perfect. But you have a large variety of things out there. And it might be a hostile environment. Hostile as in, I have a large theater, tiered theater. Are you going to do participation in there as well? Yes, you can. You just have to be creative. You just have to get rid of the typical restrictions like, oh no, it cannot be done. Then you start looking out there on the internet and you find examples of people teaching large classes and they get kids to vote, discuss with the neighbor, divide the theater in areas. Those are the kind of things that, you know, if you are creative, you still can do it. So the idea is, in class now, you have to change a little bit your mentality and really go for participatory environment. They have to participate. They have to talk to each other, which also means that you relinquish control of the situation, which is another factor that creates a lot of friction. We typically tend to be much more comfortable if the class is all quiet, then don't say anything and everything goes as planned. Whereas in a participatory environment, it's going to be a mess. It's going to be a lack of control for a few minutes, and then you regain control. But what you're trying to do here is try to cover these analyze, evaluate, and create levels. So you have to try to get your students much more engaged. And then the question that always pops all the time, does it work? And to be honest, the best proof that this is something real is because you find instances in which it works and instances in which it doesn't work. And that is what it tells me, okay, we're talking about a real thing. In other words, if you ask me, you tell me, oh yeah, we discovered this flipped classroom, it works all the time, it's perfect, we found the holy grail. I wouldn't trust it, yeah, I don't think so. But you find already literature out there, people are studying cases, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's very interesting to see why it doesn't work. Maybe the environment is not the right one, maybe it's not the right approach, maybe the students are not convinced, maybe the teaching staff is not convinced, maybe the design is not adequate. In other words, it's like any other regular teaching technique. If you deploy it properly, it'll work, or it'll have a high probability of working. If you don't deploy it properly, it'll bomb. But that's part of what we do every day anyway, so not a big difference. And the literature is growing every day with these type of examples. All right, enough of me talking. Let's start exploring how we're going to tackle this thing. And again, I'm going to hand it over mostly to you. The way it's going to work, I'm going to ask for your participation first, talking to each other, then we'll reconvene. I'll try to convey as much material as possible to the virtual crowd, and then we'll see how each of you is working on your design. So the way we organize the remaining of this session is we need to start with a very concrete outcome or a very concrete objective. This is a delicate part. This is a delicate part for various reasons. First, we have to make sure we understand the right level of complexity or the right level of detail for an outcome. You cannot have an outcome that is like the entire course. I teach introduction to computers, so they have to understand the architecture and how computers work. I cannot take that objective, the overall objective. It's too broad. I have to start chopping it into pieces. So what I'm trying to work with you is a way of identifying a reasonable, small objective that you should be able to achieve, let's say, in 1 or 2 weeks. And we will work around that. This is also the reason we ask you to first work on the videos a little bit, read about some articles. There are some posts there that are really, really interesting. One of my favorites is this ancient Rome history professor explaining how she tried to deploy the flipped classroom, and it was a little bit of a high pressure situation, but this is something that it happens. I remember a few years back when I decided to start doing these things, I talked to my students and I said, this is what we're going to do. This is going to be different. You're going to be doing something before you come to class. Then you come to class and you participate, you discuss. Is that clear? And then I have the hand at the end of the lecture. And the question was, is this the first time you're doing this? I was like, all right, yeah, contact sport. Great, excellent question. Yes, it is, but I'm totally convinced that it's going to work anyway. But this is the kind of thing that you have to be also expecting, okay? So we ask you to first look at that, and we ask you also to identify this objective. But we still are going to share it just to make sure that we are all more or less in the same level of granularity. Then the second step, which is here, well, try to develop a plan. Again, not a very detailed plan, because we're not having too much time. But I'll be satisfied if you walk out through that door saying, yeah, I know more or less now the ingredients. I can now go back to my office and start thinking a bit more about that and explore how it will be the strategy for this phase, the strategy for this other phase. And the other thing that I would like you to do is to identify where are the tricky stages. And hopefully we identify that. Okay, the tricky parts, the ones that are, ooh, I don't know how to do that actually. Because these are several pieces that you have to line up together. Eventually, we'll ask you to finalize the plan with some strategy for deploying it. But again, I'm not that worried that you don't make it to that point. I trust that you can, keep advancing on your work and eventually design the whole plan. So it's not so much a way of rushing all the way, yeah, I have here my whole plan complete. It's more like exposing you to the designs and more importantly to the ideas in the room. The collective intelligence is very, very important. Okay, so let's start with the first step. I want you to very quickly, and this is the other thing, when we give these seminars to academics, myself included, we tend to be very verbose, you know, like, oh yeah, let me tell you about my objective. And then half an hour later, I covered the first few aspects of it, and I have to still talk to you about the other one. No, you have to be brief, okay? It has to be short and to the point. We want you first to discuss very briefly what you saw in the videos, just to make sure that everybody is on the same page. Then, very important, how could you apply this to your course? First initial ideas, what are my barriers? Maybe you are totally there, or you know, like a few inches, maybe you are, I'm not seeing this happening. That's perfectly okay. Just make sure in your table you share that. And the challenges. And this is something that, again, you have to be very brief, because in some tables there is one person, oh, let me tell you about the challenges. We don't have time, we don't have money, we don't have resources, we don't have support, we don't have, okay, keep it short. Okay, we're not gonna be here trying to solve any of them. It's just making sure that everybody is on the same page. So this will be stage number one. What I want you to think about while you discuss that is the following. You need to put together basically 2 or 3 pieces. Think about that. You need to feel like 2 or 3 buckets, if you will. What happens before the students meet you? What happens while the students are face-to-face with you? That's the most delicate part. And if you want something to happen afterwards. This is a very generic framework. And then you will do whatever you want with it. Like put much more emphasis on the previous activities, put much more emphasis on the activities occurring afterwards. Then there is this layer of assessment that you have to consider. But again, rather than me telling you the recipe, step number 1, 2, 3, 4, I want you to just jump in this scenario and start see what are your pieces, what are your resources. If you are here and you're not actually teaching, consider a specific scenario. I want you to have a very concrete scenario in your head, okay? Not something, I don't want you to think in terms of general terms like, wouldn't it be great if we get the students to participate? No, I'm looking for specifics. I'm teaching law, I'm teaching international trading, and therefore my objective is this one, and the objective will need my students to do specifically these tasks before they come to class. That's the level of detail that I want you to get into. It doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. It's much more important that you go and do it, okay? All right, so let's get with the first step. Let's very, very quickly, before we jump into sharing the learning, let me go back here for a second. Very, very quickly, 1 person per table. What are the most interesting or surprising or whatever, what really came out of the videos and the material that I'm sure you all of you read before coming here? Let's start with that table over there. Anybody from that table? Any comments? The material. 2 things, yep.
Not flip, but student.
Okay.
And also that only the
Okay, I'm going to repeat the comments because since we are, so not flipped, but a student center, very important. And this is one of the main realizations when I jump into this area. Then all of a sudden you begin to hate yourself, the flipped classroom buzzword, because behind that, in fact, what it is let's put the student in the center. It's a student center. They have to participate. They're not dead bodies in there, okay? And the other one you mentioned was? Only the students can really flip a classroom, which connects with what I mentioned before. You are actually passing the responsibility of a successful experience onto them much more. Excellent. How about this table? Any comments from the previous material? Continuous engagement. This is one huge challenge. And one of the things that I've detected when we start discussing about this is that we don't tend to think too much about any technique to encourage engagement. One of the things that I found when I talk to other people is there are so many tricks out there that I wasn't aware of to increase the engagement. Again, you have to broaden your catalog of, call it tricks, techniques, whatever it works. And especially to get them engaged before they come to class, because the other big fear we all have is, all right, so suppose I do a really perfect job and create the ideal resources for them to participate. And they don't. Then you come to class and you're going all full speed ahead saying, all right, let's get some discussion going here. Nobody did anything. We all fear that moment, but that's okay. We just have to, it's like risk management. We just have to manage that risk. Okay, so continuous engagement, it's a very broad umbrella that you have to keep always on your mind. It is great if I give them the videos, it is great if I give them a simulation, but are they going to do it? And what happens if they don't? We have to We have to design for that. Okay, this table over here. Main idea, main comment out of the previous material. Okay, so the comment is, it might not be a good idea to approach the students and say, here's something new. Okay, and I agree. Here's something that is like any other technique. You are the professional in the room in charge of deciding what is the best strategy, and you just decided that. That's it. Maybe you don't need to convince the students that this is the right way. This is the way it's done. The way I struggle with that, it's under the umbrella of continuous engagement. If a student tells me, why do I have to prepare these things? This is not fair to me. I don't like it. You have to be ready to answer that. And perhaps it's not such a good idea. Well, we are trying a new thing that it works. You have to resort to much more specialized answer, maybe in the context of the degree. So I'm an engineer. One thing that I distill over the years, and I'm not saying you have to use it, but this is the kind of abstract thinking. With continuous engagement, I go back to our students like, that's great. I mean, you don't accept working before. Do you picture yourself in your job interview telling your future boss that whenever you have a meeting, you will not prepare anything before the meeting? That's a given. Do you picture yourself telling that to your future boss? Yes or no? And that does it. Now, that's the kind of thinking you have to do in order to say, well, the overall experience has a reason, and that reason has to be obvious and apparent to the student. So unless you're totally convinced and the whole thing makes sense in the context of law, architecture, I don't know what kind of degrees we have here, we'll see. Unless you are totally convinced about that, then you don't have maybe the right ways of engaging students. But I totally agree with you. This table over here, comments. Very good one. So this is, yeah, there are a few bumps in the road, and different people tune into different difficulties. And this is one very important one. So you're basically telling me that my students are gonna start talking to each other. Maybe they start browsing the net, maybe they start answering the email, maybe they start, so what? Design for that. Design for that. And if you think of it, once you embrace that possibility, you start becoming much more strategic. And we all have tricks for that. Like the table that is more likely to be reading the email is the table I'm going to keep hitting with my questions all the time. And I'm going to be next to them all the time. I'm not implying anything here, okay? But these are the things that we just need to consider to maintain engagement. And we have to live comfortably with it, okay? So I'm not saying that you should forget about that risk. There is risk. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's just that you should consider it and see what can you do about it. That's all. Yes, that table over here. Excellent comment. Excellent comment. Excellent comment. Let me repeat it in my words, which is, okay, so we are asking our students to be engaged. How about the lecturer? Double engaged. Double engaged. Yeah. Coaching, mentoring. Excellent. Excellent analogy. Exactly. So if you succeed, I succeed. But if I work, you work. And if you work, I work. So if I'm asking you to be engaged, I have to be engaged. I have to also giving you feedback. And this is what I'm doing here. You see? I ask you to read that material. Then you give me your comments. And then we put it all together. But I have to be engaging each one of you and making sure we connect these ideas. I'm facilitating this. I'm really helping you to achieve the goal. But I'm not going to achieve the goal. It's you. Perfect. Yeah. How about here? Okay, this is excellent. This is another thing that you're going to find in your class. This is when you give the previous material and they don't read it. Okay? What would you do? Sorry, Mike. All right. So what do you do? And this is something about engagement that you have to factor in. What would you do? Let him off the hook the first time. What other ideas? Extra word, so there is a little bit of friction. This is I'm trying to abstract These ideas so that it applies to all your scenarios, because each one of you, remember, I want you to be thinking about your own scenario. Create a little bit of friction. That's a good idea. Yes. Yeah, that's a very good one. Another issue that comes up all the time is like, yeah, sure, it sounds great asking your students to do something before, but how much time? So we have to be much more accurate when we schedule these tasks. And we have to be aware that these people don't have infinite time, especially in your case. Yeah. Excellent. Let me repeat that for the crowd out there. Make students aware of these requirements. And this is, I'm at the beginning. Perfect. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because in my course outline there is a section about that that says, what are your time management? What do we expect from you? How many hours do we expect you to devote to this course? What would be a suggestion for your week? When would you do the previous activities? These are kind of things that I make public, and we discuss. I had my lecture last week, first lecture, high pressure. And this is the kind of things we discuss. And I asked them, what do you plan to do with your time? How do you manage your time? So a fair warning, not a fair warning, but explaining them, not the rules, but a little bit of the context. That's perfect as well. What other ideas? I had another hand there. Okay.
And I wasn't aware to actually. I think that we've got to think about, well, to do all this, that's and
okay, exactly. So this is another thing, and I've got this this exact comment on previous seminars. I look at that list like, no way, I'm not going to do this. Okay, perfect. What do you have to do next? You have to be much more precise on that material. You probably have to reword the material and say, even though there are lots of resources here, we only want you to take a look at 2 of them. This is the kind of thing that you have to be much more aware. And the key issue is also trying to get feedback. So the communication or the continuous engagement with the students will also relate to things like this. Oh, wow, the task was overwhelming. I didn't do it because of that. Okay, fine. Next edition, immediately start tuning that, start to make sure that you state the objectives clearer, things of that sort. Okay? Yes? Yep. So that's very good point. Let me repeat it for the people online. Isn't it true that if we deploy this that requires such a high engagement, we should be much more aware of the time the students can devote to the overall experience? Absolutely. And my suggestion would be to work with a budget. So you are supposed to devote to this course 6 hours a week, 4 hours a week, 5 hours a week, and work with that budget. And then do this exercise saying, okay, I'm asking you to do this, 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 and that. Are we going over budget or not? Or, that's the other thing I want you to explore, exactly, embed the assessment in there. Remember, I want you to, there is no risk here. There is no risk. There is nothing preventing you from designing the wackiest flip learning experience. So, lift the barriers. So maybe I have this notion of the final exam. It has to be a final exam. The final exam has to be like that. Well, now you are getting into a different structure, which is I'm asking them to do something before, and I really want them to do something before. And you know how students work. I mean, not only my students, all the students. What's in it for me? Do I get something in exchange? Yes, no? And it'll change the engagement. So you have to design for that. Okay, so you're asking me for my tricks. All right, in my design, what I do, I give them scores or marks for completing the previous tasks. And I know that some of them might be cheating. I know that some of them might be taking the shortcut, but I factor that in. I go with that risk. I take that risk. And I know there might be people at the end of the semester that they have 10% of the score, a bit iffy, but I also get a lot of traction from the rest. So it's a difficult call, but in my case, in my concrete scenario, I decided to provide marks immediately after they complete the tasks, the preparation task, and I make that very obvious. So at the end of the week, before they enter the class, there's your score. Yeah, you have it. Directly goes to your final score. There are lots of concepts. I'm not saying that you have to do that, but that was my response to this risk of embracing this paradigm and then coming to class and they still didn't do anything because what's in it for me anyway? Or I'm too busy or things like that. So, and this is one of the big realizations I want you to be aware of. It's a system, so you have to design all the parts so that they interact with each other. So the assessment of the previous activity has an effect, but then I have to make sure that this effect is not too big, otherwise my final exam, what happens here, okay? I'll be happy to share with you as many details as you want from my own experience, but I also want you to explore your own scenario and go for things that you haven't considered before. Yes? Okay, so in my scenario, this large course, I meet with my students, me personally, for 2-hour lecture face-to-face, and they are supposed to do some preparation tasks, and those preparation tasks are assessed and directly added to the course marks, and then they meet again twice with tutors, and the tutors also require, or the tutorials also require some minimum preparation, smaller, because there is a flow that I envision of lecture, then tutorial, then laboratory. So for the tutorial, I don't need so much preparation because we already climbed the first steps of that cognitive ladder. We already have some basic notions. So the tutorial can be less intense in preparation, but intense in participation. We still have lots of activities participating there. And you are absolutely right. I have a team of 10 tutors. And one of the most delicate part is the initial meeting with them and say, look, this is what is going to happen. This is what I want you to do. I want you to not stay still in the room. I want you to keep talking to all the tables. I want you to organize votings. I want you to organize discussions. If you see a very good idea on this table, get a speaker, put it in front of everybody, tell everybody else. So this is an exercise that I need to do to bring the tutors on board. Risky because I have some tutors that is the first time they tutor. And it's also tricky. But yeah, life is not perfect. Yes?
For example, having that lecture, which is, I give them I give them credit in their timetable, complete the pre. Some of them, they have a sleep. But I just think that you've got to demonstrate to the students that part of what they're adapting, and you get buy-in, appreciate the flexibility.
And the rigor. I mean, you elevate. So let me repeat this. What we have here is the situation of scheduling formal time to prepare the activities for the lecture. That's a very clear message. It is so important that we're going to give it exactly the same presence in the schedule as us meeting face-to-face. Perfectly. And the type of message you are sending is, this is important, and I want you to do it. And that's what I'm budgeting time for you. Perfect. This is another way of saying, what is the need for me? My way of getting out of that was, well, I'll give you some points. In your ways, no, let me elevate it at the same category as the importance of face-to-face, and therefore, you'll increase your buy-up. Perfect idea. Any more comments? Yes? Excellent. Okay. Excellent comment. So the comment, let me repeat it for the audience, is that it is excellent to start thinking much more in detail about the time devoted by the students. How about the time devoted by the lecturers? And it increases. That is true. And this is something that you also have to throw in the budget. What would be the way around that? Tricky. In my experience, the flipped classroom has a very large or could be a substantial effort the first time you deploy it. It reduces as soon as you get it going, right? My ideas around that is, and this is something that I've been tried to convey to my colleagues at Sydney Uni, but also on other institutions, is there is nothing preventing you not to flip the whole course, but allocate 1 or 2 modules, 1 or 2 chunks, and say, we're going to do it differently. It's not the same, and maybe there are certain things we're discussing here that are not feasible, like, for example, allocating formal time. for the preparation. If you do it in 1 or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, maybe that is not possible, but still, it's something worth exploring. You also tell the students, by the way, this model is going to be different. That's it. You don't have to give too much explanation. And I want you to do this. And you create your own assessment, and you create your own, and then you go back to the rest of the semester in a regular delivery mode. Although it's not perfect, the workload, maybe it's reduced a little bit, and you get to test what is working and what is not. What is the reaction of your students? So that would be my couple of suggestions, which is you can do it gradually. You can do it continuously, you know, like year after year, maybe 2-3 years later, you have a decent collection of resources and strategies, and you start reducing the load. But I agree with you, it's active learning, and it's let me squeeze one more sentence. The reason why I think we all perceive that as more work, another way of thinking about it, the conventional, my PowerPoint and the 2 hours in front of the audience, for me, is a state of minimum energy. So no matter what you do, it'll be more work. But it is more work because we were very, very good at finding the state of minimum energy. I just put my PowerPoint away for 6 months, and then next year, oh, here we go again. Lecture 5, here we go. Lecture 5 is about this, blah, blah, blah. So what is the amount of effort do I need to do that? Almost zero. No, not zero. It's not zero. It's minimum, right? Let me first give it to you. You want to... Feedback. Correct. So even though, yeah, you might say, well, that would reduce a little bit, but there is an intrinsic component, which is, at the end of the day, what we're doing here, and there's a nice experiments to show you this, but there is nothing earth-shattering that I'm going to tell you that you don't know. The participation, it's what really underpins learning. Participation is among interaction. Interaction means we're going to talk to each other. And if we talk to each other or create material, then it's going to be feedback, assessment, continuously talking to your students, and that is time. But again, I go back to what I said before. The alternative is don't talk to them at all. Yeah, it's much less intense, but it's much less effective. So basically, the main moral of the story is there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? If you want to improve the way the students learn, there's going to be some cost. I agree. And I'm really glad you brought that up. Yeah. Oh, yeah, not only a copy. Yes, I will repeat the question. I'm going to type a link here. You have access right there. This is my URL. All my course material is there. As long as you're part of an Australian university, you can access there with your university credentials. This is a system I have with an authentication, which is very slick, if any of you want to know about it. Yeah, maybe the ones here, you cannot see it. Or I can give it to you at the end, it's no problem. Yeah, it says Tracy, because that's the login on that. Okay, let's do very quickly one more thing. And I want to keep this thing bounded, okay? You already mentioned a little bit of that, but I'd like you to have a chance of elaborating a bit more. What is the biggest single challenge you see ahead of you when you try to flip a classroom? Let's start with this table over here. What would be the biggest challenge? What comes to you is like, yes, but. One challenge. You see, this is what happens. But no, absolutely, I agree with all of them.
Even just for one lesson, just getting that one.
All these pieces together. So it's a complex system. Yeah. Excellent. So this is also the kind of thing that sometimes you're like, yeah, but then I have to pay attention to the assessment. Oh, then I need the right resources. Then, oh, wait, I need the right activities also, or tasks when I face the students. It's a bunch of pieces that I need to connect. That would be one of the main challenges. Excellent. How about here? What is the first one that comes to mind? This is one of the barriers that we get most often. Yeah, all this flipped classroom, I totally buy it, but it doesn't work in my course. This is one of the usual concepts. Because my course is about blah. My answer to that is, remember, what you're saying is that something that is being used in an increasing number of institutions just happens not to work for your specific course. So before you make that claim, Yeah, it's probably a bit challenging to find a topic. This is why I like so much this article about ancient Rome. I mean, if you tell me, are you going to flip a course on ancient Rome history? I'm like, good luck. How do you do that? But there are good descriptions of the kind of thing. It's a matter of considering activities you haven't considered before and readjust a little bit the way you think about the objectives. I'm not saying you should do it, but at least you should think about it, just for the sake of the exercise. But that's an excellent challenge. How about here? What is the one that pops up that hasn't been mentioned before? Okay, this is something I want you to go through the design. Let's see if the collective intelligence gives us ideas. And then I can also mention a few structures that are very helpful. How about here? Big challenge comes to mind. You already mentioned a few, but you want to go for another one? Planning and preparation, much more delicate, much more sophisticated. Totally agree. How about here? Okay, so the challenge here would be you agree that the needs for information literacy in this context are much bigger. So the challenge would be how do you convey that to academics? How do you provide support? Excellent, that's an excellent challenge. Perfect. How about here? Okay, the two things that you mentioned is cultural expectations and mode of delivery. Those are two big challenges. And in some other previous seminars, yeah, the question that comes up all the time is like, this all looks great, but it relies on you doing something face-to-face. What happens if I have all my students virtually? And yeah, that's a big challenge. The activities, probably they have to be reconsidered, but there are certain ingredients that translate also to the virtual world, like creating this anticipation. So something is going to happen on Friday, or something is going to happen on Thursday. We're going to meet virtually. If you cannot meet synchronously, you can always say, all right, submit something by Monday, and then we'll comment each other's work by Tuesday. And you create this notion of still, you invite them to participate one way or another. This would be other things that you have to consider. And the multicultural part, that's also definitely a challenge, and I face that in my cohort. And ways to alleviate that occurred to me, discussing this at length. So it's probably worth investing an hour with tasks and exercises and things that would lower that barrier. You know, if you have somebody from a different country that comes and says, no, to me it's not appropriate that I talk to my students, it's not appropriate that I talk to my tutor, I just wait for them to tell me what I need, and that's it. So you have to work a little bit harder on dismounting or justifying the alternatives. Excellent. How about here? Yep. Instructor time to adapt to this new methodology. That's a huge challenge, definitely, and this is something that you have to address. Yes.
At the end of the day, I saw it there. But with in that flip engagement specialist.
Yeah. Yep.
The other activities got to engage tutors. You change those. Instruction, tutors, you already mentioned them.
Okay, so
These great play a slide. Teaching team take the course, the activity.
okay, so your question is, or your challenge is related to the fact that you started broadening the type of activities and getting the students engaged and getting interaction.
About what's the experience for the student.
Exactly. So bring the experience of the students to the centers. What are they experiencing? If I'm asking them to participate, who are they talking to? Who are they? Who do they need to interact with? If it is the academic or the tutors, I need to budget for that as well.
The hounds on a merry chase. You've got to tease them along where you want them to go without the constraints. You know, they're following. You know,
What you mean by you means the academic. The academic, yeah, trying to lure them or create the right environment so that they follow you in this. Yeah, so you're basically taking the lead and say, okay, this is the way I want you to go. This is the strategy. This is what I want you to do. But you have to make sure that they follow you and they really buy that philosophy. That's good. You had another comment.
From the learner's perspective, access to them.
Oh, yeah.
Secondly, can they
Yep.
do curation, for example?
Yep. So the comment here, the challenge here is if you really broaden also this scenario and you start considering new activities, new material, throw in the videos, throw in the annotations, throw in whatever, you know, sophisticated thing, think about the students. How do they access that? And you have to be aware of the success of these activities. Are they using the videos or not? Because I might be putting beautiful material out there and none of them is accessing. So that's another challenge. And technology sometimes gives you an easy way to detecting what is happening. If you put the video there, maybe you have the number of times the video was visualized. And if you have a cohort of 300 and the number of times the video was visualized was 30, then right there, it's not working. And you have to be also a bit strategic about that, finding that data back to you. Or ask them to, like for example, the link that I gave you for the previous material, it's a direct link. But you know about these platforms in the net that abbreviate the links for you. Like the one I gave you for the course, it's an abbreviation, right? Those abbreviating platforms, they also tell you the number of times the abbreviation has been used. So I can check how many of you looked at the material. And I can anticipate the session and say, look, I got 70 people here and my hit count is 20. Means 1/3 of the audience looked at it, or even less. And some of you might be thinking, but that is not accurate, but it's better than nothing, right? It's better than that complete darkness. So that's also the kind of thing you have to factor in, which is a very delicate. I think the main common thread is, all right, this is great. We're going to do lots of interesting stuff, but the fragility or it becomes a much more delicate system. And sometimes we have to keep the student's perspective to make sure we don't overdo it. We don't provide something that it just doesn't work. Excellent, yeah. Yeah, that's a very good question, and this is something that is at the end of the presentation today, which is how do you measure success? And these varies significantly from scenario to scenario. Let me give you one concrete example that I experienced. In my case, my first year course, at the end of the semester, here's this exam that it's worth 60%, and the exam has this component of open questions and a multiple choice test, and I had very poor results there. And that drove me to say, okay, we need to do something about it. The multiple choice test answers were more or less okay. The open questions was devastating. So I got the feeling that the students were not grabbing the capacity to think. So I started flipping the course. And then what I did, and you have to be a bit formal about it, it's I selected my indicators. In my case would be, yeah, this final exam, this course. Let's see what happens there. And then over the course of 2 years, what I see is an increase of between 5 and 7% in those scores, whereas the answers for the multiple choice questions remain the same. So this was my way of saying, okay, I see the effect of what I'm doing. They are now much more capable of answering an open question, which is more a little bit higher on that level that we discussed before, the Bloom taxonomy. They have to analyze, they have to provide a solution for a problem. It's not just ticking a box, which one is it? And I saw an improvement there. It was an improvement 5-6% on the average score. So that was my way of telling myself, yeah, this is working, this is creating an improvement. But this is a very interesting point. If we do all this, it has to be for a reason. And the reason has to be an improvement. And for an improvement, you have some sort of indicator. Now, the indicator necessarily doesn't need to be the academic performance. You could say something like, learning is enriched if the students participate. So maybe your indicator is a student participation. And if student participation increases, maybe you are providing them a better experience. So you have to choose carefully your indicator. And there is not a one single recipe that will tell you what to choose and how to analyze it. The other thing that helps, the other thing that helps is not so much taking a single picture, like, all right, I'm going to give them these videos and I'm going to measure how many times they watch the video. It's more like a trajectory. If you are responsible of that experience over the years, then you start saying, all right, so the videos, this is my initial baseline, and I got 30 visualizations or 50, whatever. Next year, I'm going to complement the video with some questions. So what happens? Do they go up or down? And you start tuning those activities to make them a bit more engaging and start seeing the effect over a trajectory. So you need a little bit of patience. But if you think of it, that's the way most of us work in our course. Like, well, some things are not working, let me change them a bit. So this is a bit more formal in the sense that you increase the variety of resources out there. You increase the variety of interaction. So you have to have a sense of what happens. Let me give you another example. I use a discussion forum in my course. And that discussion forum tells me how many times students read the posts, wrote, comment, and the number of days they were connected to the platform. So this is a very good way for me to say, okay, I have a discussion forum. I am promoting the discussion forum in my activity. Some of the activities say, and your solution, go to the forum and post. So that's probably one way for me to gauge how much engagement am I getting. Am I getting 50%, 60%, 80%? And see the trajectory, if I tweak the activities, if the participation is changed, if I ask for, instead of, here's another thing that I do. Instead of saying, okay, go to the forum and post, what I do in the lectures, I actually pull up the discussion forum. It has the capacity to do polls, and I run polls, which goes to your previous comment. What is happening in the face-to-face? Polls is a very common resource. Let's vote. And I actually make the joke, voting is mandatory in Australia, so everybody votes there. So if I have 400 folks there, I need to see the 400 count in there, and I make it a little bit of a challenge. Will we make it to 400 today or not? Let's see. Why? Because I am increasing participation, but I also have a way of measuring that, and that trick gets the student familiar with the discussion forum. So I bring them in. Or the first activity is, tell me the brand and model of your mobile phone. I'm teaching microprocessor, and see if you figure out what is the microprocessor inside your phone. They get excited about that. It's like, oh yeah, I wonder, which one? And then they start bragging about it. Oh, I have the iPhone, blah, 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 and inside has an ARM 64 bits, blah, 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 and they post that in the forum. That's it. I got you exactly what I wanted you, which is in the forum, participating, talking about microprocessors. Boom. And you have that indication. That's the kind of things that you have to. Yes?
To the comment from the chat, it's a 50%. I have colleagues who try to say 10%. Concerned about.
Should we be concerned about attendance of 10%? Or 50%. Okay, so my way of approaching that is, again, get a baseline. What is your attendance today? Suppose you're doing the PowerPoint thing. What is your attendance? 10%. All right. Then next thing you do is you try to flip a couple of modules. You offer them something to prepare, and there is something happening in the class. What happens with your attendance? Remains 10%, goes 5 points, goes to 20%. If you do it in the middle of the semester, it's a little bit tricky because students have an inertia. But the strategy could be, I'm offering you something in the class, something that is valuable. If you're here, you get it. If you're not here, you don't get it. One of the questions that I get asked all the time by my students, are the lectures being recorded? Yes, they are. The trick that I play is, I'm the only one with a microphone. I'm not repeating questions. You're here, you listen to them, you discuss, and then at some point in the recording, you're sitting in your couch and you hear me saying, and now talk to your neighbor and discuss about this question in the board and think which is the correct answer. And I stay mute for a couple of minutes. So you're sitting on your couch thinking, yeah, I should be discussing this with somebody, but you don't have anybody there to discuss. And then after 2 minutes, I say, all right, talk to your neighbor. If you agree with your neighbor, that's fine. Find somebody else that chose a different answer and try to convince that person. And then we vote again. That's another activity you can do in the classroom. Vote, compare, revote. Big mess in class, right? You're sitting in your couch. What is going on? It's like, And then you vote again. And then the number of correct answers goes much higher than before. Why? Because you talk to your neighbor and you discuss things. Perfect. what I was describing is my students that are all of them face-to-face, they ask me, will you record your lectures? Yes, but you're supposed to be here. So a totally different scenario is I have half of my students here, half of my students online. That's a totally different scenario. Then you have to, if they are live, I mean, in my case it's a recording of the screen. No, but I don't have, yeah. No, these are two different scenarios. I don't have external students. They're supposed to be all there. If I have external students, then I change my strategy. Then whatever happens in the lecture has to be much more suitable to be recorded. Not so much, because you're still offering the possibility to interact with each other face to face. So the ones online, you have to provide some alternatives, and that would be the forum. But the trick would be, all right, let me give you some ideas or some exercises that then we discuss in the forum, or we vote in the forum for the people online. Yes. Okay. All right. Great interaction. This is working very nicely. We're probably going much slower than we anticipated, but that's okay. All right. Step number 1. Very quickly, in your table, again, I see that you are being very brief and very succinct in your comments, which is beautiful. Let's keep it up. Now, in your table, very briefly, share your outcome. I'm teaching law or trade or social services, and this is what I want them to learn. Share your tricks, your current approaches, very briefly, okay? And discuss some initial ideas about the preparation tasks. And I'm going to give you just 5 minutes for that. Well, 5 minutes is probably too tight. How many people in the table? 3, 6 minutes each. 10, 15 minutes to do that. And then we'll do a quick round to share these ideas. Same thing for the crowd online. You can use the chat to start sharing your thoughts very briefly. And then we'll summarize some of them and discuss in common. All right? All clear? Let's go. You need this. All right, get it back to me then. You want one of this? You want one, mate? Okay, you got this, you got this. Do you get one of this? All right. You got your plan. You want one of this? You got one? Excellent. Did you get one of this? Just in case. Cassandra, I think you need one of this. Got it already? Already got one? Good. All right, excellent. You got it? You need this? You got one? Another one there? Okay. all the way to 10 o'clock? Boy, are we late. Oh, I definitely.
There might be another 10.
Right.
I don't know. So they might start banging the door.
All right. No
Sorry,
worries.
I don't know. People online. Fantastic.
Bring it back again. We have been going over our time budget for all these activities. So my suggestion is the following. I already see a lot of interesting conversations happening about the outcomes, interesting ones from the online crowd as well. One of them about sustainability. You have to convince the students to learn about sustainability. Another one about ultrasound diagnosis, which brings to me very good ideas about how to do it gradually. So what I want you to do is, let's bypass this first discussion and move on to step 2. After you identify the outcome, you start discussing what type of activities you think it could happen in the preparation stage. Concrete things. I want my students to do this, okay? For your outcome. As soon as you agree on the outcome, let's focus on the previous activities. I want from each one of you a collection of 2 or 3 activities, concrete to your scenario. And then we'll bring it together and discuss them. 3 previous activities. get a quick overview of the type of ideas that are coming up. The online crowd is already frantically writing a lot of good ideas there about activities, which we can read. I personally like this, the suggestion of the person that proposed the diagnosis with ultrasound. And you can picture there going to class with your PowerPoint and say, okay, you see this ultrasound? This is the way you would use it to diagnose this, this, and that. Give it to them. Pose them a challenge, preparation. Here is your ultrasound. You are the doctor. You are supposed to diagnose it. I know you have no idea how to do this. Give it a go. So you already put them in the mentality to start, oh, wow, I have to deal with this issue. And I have to deal with this issue before even the instructor tells me how to do it. Go. That would be an excellent preparation activity. You just push them there in the context. What is it going to happen? What is the worst thing that it can happen? Nothing. And you get them exposed to the need. And probably, if you do that through a discussion forum, they'll talk to each other and say, what do you make out of this? I think this is the type of diagnosis that would follow a certain pattern or not. And the tutor can always supervise that discussion. All preparation. So when they come and face you, face to face, you have them in a totally different mentality about to discuss something they're already familiar with. That's quite a lot of mileage you get out of that. So that's the example that came online. Let's go very quickly from the table. One activity, very briefly, you have to tell us your context and the previous activity. Want to go? This is another ingredient that keeps popping all the time. Real world. Real world is a very good leverage. And you can connect anything to the real world if you ask me. Anything. And you are able to shape the scenario. So sometimes it's a big pull. You pull the headline from yesterday's newspaper and try to connect it with your course. And that's your previous activity. Look what happened yesterday in the newspaper. We need to solve that. You know how to do it? No. But still, give it a go. And this type of thing then will create the need for, okay, I need to go to class and figure out exactly what kind of questions is my company trying to solve and how do I articulate a decision-making process, because I just found out that making decisions is a very, very complex task. Okay, that's it, exposure. They get exposed to basic topics. Okay, very quickly here, another previous activity. No, any previous activity you can think of, a preparation class, or if you want to focus on the student incentive, that's fine. Okay. Does that mean that they increase their participation on preparing the sessions? Okay, but did you detect them engaging more before they meet you face to face? Okay, so this is another very good technique. You bring a really real problem from a real institutions and you give the responsibility to them. We're going to solve this. So what you're creating there is a little bit of expectations on one hand. They expect you to do something about a real problem, and a little bit of friction as well. It's like, ooh, what happens if I don't do it? So it's actually not you that is saying, please do this. It's somebody else out there with a lot of credibility. And this is also another leverage that I've seen in a lot of flip scenarios. Pull the reality in. And again, you are the puppet master. You can reshape the scenario to fit your needs. If you need to squeeze some specific topic about web development, such that accessibility of the web pages, guess what? The company just decided that that is the main priority. And it's not me telling you to do it. It's the company that needs it. Perfect. All right, another one from here. Yeah? Okay, no problem. No problem. I lost track of how many tables I covered. This one. Give me a previous activity that you think it's effective. Go. Okay. Beautiful example. Not one example, but two. Something that doesn't work when you try to get connected with them, and what can we do? Is there any incentive for them in terms of marks? Participation in class, but not in the preparation. Okay, and this is something that you might find that it creates a little bit of friction, which is if you come to class prepared, it'll be a very rewarding experience. Yeah, but they won't do it anyway. So you have to be a bit more strategic and say, okay, I want you to do something before you come to class. I don't trust you. These kind of things. All right, that's a very good example. How about here? One preparation activity. Before. Okay. Semester, yeah. Okay. So you see here another very elaborate activity in which the students have to read some material, watch some videos, then they're going to be asked some questions about those videos. So you're basically offering them an offer they cannot refuse, right? Something that when they come to class, they already know about the basic stuff. Okay, we are so late, but this is good because it was due to the interaction that we're going to jump immediately onto the next section, which is the one I want you now to focus, which is what happens in class. Now here, I want you to come up with the wackiest activity that is serving your purpose. What do I mean by wacky? Wacky is something that you haven't considered before, and it's a little bit out there. But remember, the goal is, we have two goals. One, it has to tell, or it has to be coherent with what happened when they prepare the lecture. And second, it has to build on the level of complexity of the preparation activities. So if I piggyback on the ultrasound diagnosis, if I already gave them some images for them to read and try to diagnose, the activity in class has to go beyond that. It has to be engaging, and it has to provide them with something that is meaningful on that scale. So maybe they need to analyze something in class, and then something happens there that brings the message to them. Oh yeah, that's the way you analyze an ultrasound image. Okay? Let's give it a go. We are way over time, but let's see if we manage to squeeze a short discussion, and then we'll go table by table. This is perhaps the most important, with the most creative activities. Try to avoid the usual suspects. No pressure. Okay, let's give it just 2 more minutes, otherwise we're gonna go way over time. 2 more minutes and then let's get the best in-class activity. So which one is yours? Is there dancing involved? Telling you, have to think out of the box. Okay, let's see what we got. If we were in a regular class, it's not the case because this audience has been incredibly interactive. But if, no worries. This audience has been incredibly interactive. This is the reason why I'm so late anyway, but that's okay. In my class, if I'm doing this and I'm asking my students to produce something, then the incentive would be each table will produce one activity. We'll vote the best one. Now, for this crowd, there's no need to do that because you're already engaged, right? For a first-year course, second-year course, third-year course, you would be amazed the amount of traction you get out of, oh, this table has been the best one, the best activity. And everybody, oh, thank you very much. And then they get excited. Let me tell you more. Okay, so this is the kind of things that you can also deploy in your class. And it takes no effort. Just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Raise your hand for those of you who want the activity number 1 the best. And then you say, okay, number 3 won. Plus, 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 plus. And you get this kind of engagement. They are really willing to listen to the other activities. So let's see. We're not going to do any voting, but let's do one activity in class that you would deploy in your scenario. Let's start with this table over here. What would that be? Okay. 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 Cartoon characters, they prepare that before they come to class or they? In class. Okay, in class. Good. I know what you're thinking. Do I have the computer? Do I have the software? Do I have? Doesn't matter. It's just thinking outside of the box. And what would you do with those cartoons? You show them in the screen? And the cartoons would be doing the dialogue or the discussion which is contributing to your outcome. Okay, good. That's a good one. This table over here, what do you propose? Perfect. That's it. Okay. All right, so by the map, you mean there is a tangible? Okay, that's another trick. That's why I did this. It's tangible. We're still humans. We like to touch, right? So even though you do online, and a lot of resources, if you give something to them that they can touch, that is something that, you know, they can relate to. And in your case, yeah, if you expose them, those maps with those solutions for your problem, that'll create self-awareness and the sense of ownership. It's all these things that you've heard about. It's a matter of combining. Yeah, it's a very good one too. How about here? Okay. One-to-one time after they pass the pre-entry quiz. Okay, that's also a very good one. How about here? Go. Okay. Okay. So this is an activity and a challenge that comes with the activity, right? Which is get a document that has been reviewed with the changes tracked, and then you have to provide feedback on those changes. And then it's an online class. And then you realize that students might not be aware of this change tracking mechanism in there. All right, that's a very good example. It'll get students discussing these things. The way to overcome the challenge is maybe you provide them that document already open. So it gets in front of their faces. So you don't let that little glitch come across or hinder your activity. It's like, here's the editor. Here's what happened. These are the changes. Look at them. Give me, what is the first comment that comes to your mind when you read these changes? What happened here? What would be your feedback? And then they start exchanging the opinions. That's the other thing that we're doing here. We are exposing you to a large number of ideas very quickly. And the way I do that is not with my PowerPoint, it's actually relying on you, all these activities. So I'm sure that that type of idea, maybe in the context on that table is like, oh, I can do something similar. Not exactly with changing tracking changes, but with something similar in which a document has been modified. That's the kind of thing we want. And that's the kind of thing you would expose your students when you have this given to them. And forget about that. Is it that important that they are aware of tracking changes? Maybe not. Or maybe this is something you can do on the side. But for that activity, you have to be very strategic and give it to them already ready for them to think and exchange ideas. Excellent. How about here? Okay, students in the center, ownership of the idea. It's a design task, which is up there. They have to create. We're talking about the top-notch level of the hierarchy. You give them exposure. You let them work on that. Comments. Those are very good ideas, and they could happen face-to-face. If you're not in that frame of mind, you lose a lot. Okay, how about this table over here? Go. Okay. Project management is the context. Okay. So they write a report on what? On a project. And what happens in class then with that report? So the report makes sense, or the report is coherent, or okay. Okay, that's like peer reviewing. Okay. What are the table? This one. Okay. So this is a video simulation of a company, trading money and everything. What happens in class? What happens in the face-to-face?
They run their business and they make decisions for their every class will roll the
Okay.
and see who's making the most.
Okay.
If they don't turn up to class, make decisions.
Okay, perfect. Let me give you another example of my own course. One of the unusual ones that I do. I teach engineering. I need to teach my students how does a system work. And the system has different parts. So it's an architecture with 5 blocks, like the memory, the microprocessor, whatnot, all right? What do? Previous to come to class, some videos explaining what every block does in detail. 10, 15 minutes, each one of them. And then when they come to class, I ask for a volunteer. And I have a bunch of sheets in my hand with the name of these blocks. There is 5 blocks. So who wants to talk about memory? And eventually I'll get a volunteer. Okay, you get good at that too. So then this volunteer is going to explain how memory works. And what it'll happen is that this person is going to start saying, but, and then you ask for help. The peers, help him or help her. She's struggling with this. Do we have to go? So amazingly, the peers will help this person, not me. They'll react much quicker than if it is me. Why? Because it's their colleague that is in danger. And they say, yeah, no, what you have to do is this. All right, so as soon as I do that, I give that person the name of that block. So you are memory. And I do that for the microprocessor. You are the microprocessor. And you are the, and I end up doing that for 5 or 10 minutes. And then I want to explain how these blocks talk to each other. So I ask them, can you stand up, memory? What would you talk to that system? And they say, I don't know. Well, help this person, help him or help her. What kind of things do you think that are happening? So they start discussing. This is happening in about 15, 20 minutes. Okay? And then at the end, they got a sense of how the system works, and they even put a face to that. They even put a face to each block. And then they sit down, and they discuss how that computer would execute one program. That's it. That's a 20, 25-minute slot that I use for this intense thing, and the videos are helping understanding the basic concept. Yes? There it is. Okay, this is an excellent example. And I know some of you might be thinking, yeah, but I don't have any site visits. That's okay. But just distill the essence of that, which is a very real example, a very real type of responsibility you're giving it to them. You put them in a spot that they have to produce something. That would be also something that you could extrapolate from the site visit. And then there is something in exchange, like, okay, you solve all these questions. Now there'll be some sort of reward or exposure or recognition or ownership. Okay, perfect. Perfect. So we see here something that spans across one lecture or two lectures, more like the whole philosophy of exchanging information. Another one totally unrelated to that, and it's related to big cohorts. If I have 300 people in a lecture theater, what kind of platform am I going to do to... One of the simple things, and I've seen this in the net, is you give them 4 cards with 4 colors. Each one of them, 4 cards, a paper, an A4. You give it to them, and then you start voting, and you have 4 answers in the screen. You introduce a topic. You are, I don't know, if you are in sustainable development, you are supposed to organize the development of a plot of land in a city. And these are the issues, these are the consequences, these are the premises. What kind of a strategy would you choose? You show 4 answers, up. And then everybody votes. Everybody votes. And you see the color that dominates. That's it. That right there, they are engaged. And then you say, ooh, I see a lot of variety. You have to talk to each other. You have to convince each other, and you vote again. And then you see how the color evolves. Does it gravitate towards red, which is the correct one, or towards blue, which is the incorrect one? Oh my God, this is blue. What is happening here? And then you engage in this discussion. You can do that with 300, 400 people. It's not a problem. You rely on them being next to each other and see the color. It's very visual. The one sitting in first row, they look back, it's like, whoa, you see all that? Or you can ask them to turn around the color so that everybody sees what is the color that is dominating the discussion. Those are things that you can scale. You don't even need technology for that. So this is the type of thinking that you have to be much more comfortable with. Why not? Or this mimic. This discussion that I described to you before, I learned it for somebody else. You step up and you pretend to be something and you move. I have this chemistry instructor friend that the vibration of the molecules, he pulls down a couple of people, yeah, and they say, I vibrate like this. This is the way the molecule is. And you do that. Why? Because if you pull 4 people from the audience, you bring them down there and they see it, it is much more engagement. They'll be much more into it than you saying, this is my PowerPoint slide 59, patterns on how the molecules move. Move on. They won't even be paying attention. Whereas if it is the peers that are down there doing that, that's much more different. So these are the kind of tricks that I know we are way over time, and you've been a fantastic audience, 15 minutes over what we've. So let me conclude with this consideration. So hopefully we provoke enough questions or enough new ideas for you to consider. What I'd like you to take home, and it's by no means a comprehensive list of things, but at least food for thought, is remember that you have to start always with the outcome. You need to know what is supposed to happen. My trick to get myself into that frame of mind is, if I picture the students walking out that door, what kind of conversation would be ideal for them to have? So if I'm teaching this architecture thing, I would picture my student walking out and saying, oh, wow, now I understand the architecture works like this, and this one is talking to that one, and now I understand why this needs to talk to this other one. All right, this is what I want them to do after the 2 hours in the lecture and a little bit of extra work preparing that. So let's plot that journey, okay? Then you start identifying what kind of things can they do before they come to class. And do not limit yourself to the fact that, oh, but they don't know about this. Oh, but they don't know the basics. Oh, but they don't. No. Just expose them. Give them the responsibility. Real scenario. Push them out there. For us engineers, it's very easy because that's what we do all the time. We have no idea how to solve a problem, but still we give it a go. This is the way we work. So for us, it's kind of like, yeah, sure, why not? I don't know what I'm doing, but so this is something good for them. What is the risk? Nothing. They get engaged. They get into the topic. This ultrasound diagnosis that popped up as an example online, that's a very good one. Give it to them. They have the expert material in their hands. The tasks in class, those are the most delicate ones. those are the ones you have to say, all right, if they know about this, how can we use that to jump board? How can we use that to push it a bit more, to convey that idea? To me, personally, that's the one that I struggle the most with. I have to know what to do these 2 hours. And to be honest, sometimes I schedule certain activities, and it's like being a musician, right? You write your own songs, and you say, this is a beautiful song. It's going to be fantastic. Then you go to the concert, and it bombs miserably. So you pull it out immediately. This doesn't work. I need to schedule another one. So there is a little bit of this curation of your material in class because it's a much more delicate scenario. And I typically run this cycle of 20, 25-minute discussion about something, and then we switch and we do another activity. And then I end up scheduling 4 or 5 events on the session. Other things for you to take home. You can also include tasks done after the class, but remember this time budget. If you overdo it, then they'll come back to you and say, yeah, this is fantastic, but there's no way I can keep up with this. So think about it. You might not want to do anything after class or something basic or some really low type of load kind of thing because the activity, the intensity may happen in the face-to-face session. Don't be shy about formative assessment. Students love it. When I say, here are these questions for you to try. And you can try as many times as you want. You mean you're not keeping track of how many times I failed? No, you can fail as much as you want. They like that. Oh, okay. I'll try and keep trying and keep trying. So don't be shy about providing those type of resources. If you get it wrong, nothing happens, do it again. Oh, okay. That lowers a little bit the resistance from the students and helps you to create this notion of it doesn't matter, just keep trying. As long as you come here and you're engaged, that's okay. That's a measure of engagement. And finally, be very strategic on how you articulate the summative assessment. So pushing all 100% marks all the way to the final exam, it is definitely an option, but there are other options. And students react very positively to that. How many of you have had a discussion with a student saying, oh, my score was very low, but you have no idea how many hours did I dedicate to this? Yeah, but it's not the hours that I'm measuring something else. What if you are willing to walk that trade-off in between? It's like, okay, you're putting some effort on answering these questions and participating in the forum. All right, let's meet you halfway. Let's give you some sort of marks for you to recognize that effort. It might not be the whole bulk of a scores, but at least I'll get you something that will have a higher probability of you being successful. Yes. So, like I said, it's not a perfect science, and this is the kind of thing, yeah. And you can start tweaking the content, or tweaking the motivation, or tweaking the surroundings, and see if that 50% goes up, goes down, and you start refining it. Yeah. Yeah. What I do with that, and that's very interesting, this word of selling them, what I do with that is I show them 2 graphs, right? One of them is much better than the other in terms of scores, and say, this is, suppose you have the choice of doing the course, either here or here, same material, same teacher, everything identical, but look at the scores here and look at the score. Which one would you choose? And they say, okay, what are you kidding? I mean, that one, of course. Okay, that's the one with people that got engaged, so it's up to you, your call. So this is the kind of things that you have to leverage. Ah, okay. Yeah. Okay. I told you at the very beginning that it was a 2-hour seminar. I think you took it very seriously and said, yeah, let's make it a 2-hour. So thank you very much for your attention. Hopefully this is just the beginning of conversation. I see a lot of interaction among yourself, which is the key issue. It's not so much about me telling you anything. It's much more about you now keeping the discussion. So thank you very much for your attention. It's been a pleasure. Very interactive crowd. I'm really, really happy that this thing worked as much as for you as it worked for me. And yeah, feel free to drop me a note if you deploy these things and you struggle with these issues. I'll be very, very happy to know about these things. The way I learn the most is exchanging this kind of knowledge with everybody. I mean, most of the things that I tell you about, I picked up from somebody else. So that's the way it works, the collaborative spirit. Thank you. And thank you to the people online.